Well, hello everybody, and welcome to another live stream. Hope you enjoyed that little video zippity doodah bit I had at the beginning. Thanks very much if you're joining live. If you're watching this afterwards, thanks as well for watching it. So we have 1 hour. This is the 7th live stream that I've actually done. Sorry, I just realized I've got some music playing in the back because I was checking on there if I was live as well, and it all gone fine. Anyway, so this is the 7th of these that I've done, so that's very exciting. And thanks if you're joining me for a 7th time, or if you've joined me before. Basically, let me run through what's going to happen on this live stream today. So we're going to kick off, first of all, by just taking a quick look at what was news over the last week, particularly what's happened in the last couple of days, leading on from one of the videos that I did earlier this week with an update. So I'm going to talk about some really big changes and some big updates that have happened. So we'll do some updates. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk very briefly about channel membership, something that's just been launched on the channel, and then we'll get into the Q&A session. I've already seen some people posting questions, so please, if you are live, in the comment section, the chat section, please put your comments there, put your questions there, and I will try and make sure that over the next hour I answer as many of those as I possibly can. And there's some great ones coming in, which I'm looking forward to getting stuck into. So as I said, keep posting those questions there, and we will get to those. Also have a couple questions that were asked on the channel. So if you think of a question, after the live stream, drop me a note with that or ask it on the channel, and I'll try and bring some of those in. So let's kick off, first of all, by taking a look at some updates, some really big news. Quite a lot of stuff has happened over the last couple of days in cruising, which gives you a chance to come on and leave your various questions. So earlier this week, I did one of my update videos, and this one was specifically focusing at the US and what was happening with cruising in the United States at this particular time as we head forwards. And so I wanted to update a couple of things in there. The main theme of that, if you haven't watched the video, was around the lack of progress between the cruise lines and the CDC. The CDC, the Center for Disease Control, have to eventually approve and sign off sailing starting again. And there isn't that much engagement going on. So I was talking about some of those developments there. So let's take a look at some of the news. And I have, I think it's 4 pieces of news that I wanted to touch on that have really happened over the last couple of days. And it'd be great also, of course, to get your thoughts on these. And the first of these is a little bit linked to that point about the CDC and what's happening with cruising. So one of the big developments is, and I think it was on Thursday this week, for those of you based in the UK, you'll be familiar with it, but those of you who aren't, is the Foreign Office, so the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. They're the people who are responsible for giving travel advice and, is it safe to visit somewhere, not safe to visit somewhere. And they had lifted a lot of restrictions on places that could come into the UK and not have to quarantine for 14 days. But also if British citizens left the UK to visit, I think it was about 70 different countries, when they came back, they didn't have to quarantine. Now, places like the United States, for example, is excluded from that. So anyway, people from the UK and EU aren't even allowed to go into the US, so the US has closed their borders. But if people come in from the United States, they have to quarantine for 14 days. But very significantly, on, I think it was the 9th, so whatever day the 9th was, I think that was Thursday, this advice came out from the Foreign Office, which said that they advise against cruise ship travel at this time. This is due to the ongoing pandemic and is based on medical advice from Public Health England. And it says they will continue to review it. And actually, a couple of days later, one of the ministers responsible within the Foreign Office said that actually they're probably looking at around about October to review that. So that's fairly significant, because if the Foreign Office says that you can't travel somewhere, it immediately invalidates your travel insurance. Now, a lot of people got very upset about that, particularly because I think they were concerned about people booking cruises. But very significantly, people in the UK have been advised not to travel. And the advice before that had been people over the age of 70. So people got really, really kind of uptight about that. In practice, there's very little cruises that you can do at the moment. As I mentioned, if you can't fly into the US to go cruising if you're from the UK, and of course, cruising has not started in the US, but there are some pockets, and I'll talk about it in my next point, that is kicking up with cruising. But it looks like it's going to be reviewed. Now, someone had already seen it asked a question just before the live stream had started that I will just touch on because it is very applicable to this point. But as I said, I will come back a little bit later. And Nigel had left this question, which is, greetings from Belfast. Hi there in Belfast. My question to you is, are the FCO Britain's CDC? Have they got a clue about, and do you think they will U-turn, and roughly when? Hashtag desperate for a cruise. Nigel, the Foreign Commonwealth Office isn't the same as the CDC. I guess the closest thing to the Foreign Commonwealth Office in the US would be something like the State Department or something like that. The State Department, who are the ones that regulate, who control the borders. So the Foreign Office is in charge of the borders. The equivalent, the closest equivalent to the CDC is Public Health England. Now, of course, you also have a Public Health Scotland, Public Health Wales, but Public Health England is the big body that the national government works with. So that's the closest, and that's very important because although this ban has come into place, the Foreign Commonwealth Office are not the people who decide if cruising can start out of the UK. That is really Public Health England. And we know, for example, that the cruise lines are actively talking to them, first of all, and secondly, to the Department of Transport. Those are the two critical bodies that will approve cruising to start. And in fact, what the Foreign Office said is once Public Health England basically said cruising is okay, they will lift that advice. Now, what I want to talk about, though, is cruising itself. So as I mentioned, that video that I had this week spoke about the situation in the US, which, to be honest with you, is not looking very promising in terms of the timescale for cruising to start out of the US. And this was confirmed. One of the points I made in that video was that the CDC is not even talking to the cruise lines about resumption of cruising. And that was, again, confirmed on Friday when Arnold Donald, who is the CEO of the entire Carnival Corporation, so they have obviously 100 America, Seabourn, Costa, AIDA, Carnival, obviously, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he confirmed in that results call that the CDC and the cruise lines have not yet started discussing the protocols for resumption of cruising. So as you can see, that does mean that cruising is, it's some way off. The CDC, no sale order expires on the 24th of July. It will get renewed, as we can see based on that. And what everyone's waiting for is when they make the announcement and how long it's for. However, one of the things that I think I've said, and if you were on some of the previous live streams, one of the predictions that I had, or whatever you want to call that, the beliefs that I had, maybe even, was that cruising was going to start up much more where the actual infection rates were falling, they were getting much lower, where some of the lockdowns were easing. And it was also likely to be where health authorities and governments could control what was happening within their territory. And we're seeing that happening in Europe a lot. There's a lot of cruising starting up in Europe. And it's not just the small ships. Those of you who've watched some of my previous videos around this, or have actually perhaps even watched this last video that I did, the last live stream that I did, I was talking about some small ship cruise lines starting up. The good news is, for those of you into cruising, is bigger ships are starting up, and it's very regional. So I've got a list of them here. So I'm going to run through those. So what we've seen in Norway, and of course I've spoken about Norway many times, Hurtigruten have been cruising in Norway for Norwegian guests and also for Danish guests. And they are going to have, by the end of this month, 12 of their 14 ships up and running. Sea Dream has got both their ships running in Norway. And again, it's for Norwegian and for Danish guests. Now, from the middle of this month, Norway is opening its borders. And it also, from what I can gather, which I still need to get 100% confirmed, is they will start to allow other nationalities on those cruises. The second thing we've seen, and this is really what's happened over the last week, is cruising in Germany is ramping up significantly between now and the end of the month in a really big way. So in Germany, Hurtigruten, which I also mentioned last time, they started sailing a ship. It's a 14-day trip up to Norway, only for German guests, no ports of call. So it's all at the moment simply been kayaking, scenic cruising. Now, once they open the borders, they will start to be allowed to do port calls. In Germany, you've also got AIDA has got approval from the German government to start sailing. They're going to be sailing, I think it's 3 ships. These are going to be out of Hamburg and the other port in Germany, which unfortunately, sorry, I've forgotten the name. I didn't write it down, I should have. But they're starting up, and these are short cruises, and they're cruises to nowhere, because of course the challenge that Germany has is they don't have lots of ports to call out, so it's cruises to nowhere. You've also got TUI's Mein Schiff, which is very, very popular with German passengers. And so that's starting sailing as well. Also, again, out of 2 ports for German passengers only, and cruises to nowhere. And Hapag-Lloyd, which is the very premium cruise line, which is a joint venture between TUI and Royal Caribbean, they're launching 2 ships. So if you're in Germany and you're a German citizen, in fact, if you're German, Austrian, or Swiss, you can start cruising on large ships during the course of July. So that's definitely cranking up and moving ahead. In France, this weekend, Ponant have started their sailing for French residents out of French ports, and they're actually calling on different French ports. Now, in the UK, despite that thing we saw from the Foreign Office, and that is why it comes back to a good point that Nigel had asked, is Hurtigruten during the course of the last week have launched a series of cruises out of the UK for UK passengers calling in UK ports, although one of them actually does call at a port in Ireland. Now, despite the fact that the Foreign and Commonwealth no cruise guidance came out, what Hurtigruten made very clear, which is what all the other UK lines are doing, is they're in discussions with Public Health England, with the Department of Transport, and they are very confident these cruises will go. I've actually booked on one of those cruises. The very first cruise is on the 2nd of September. They're 5-night cruises, calling it, as I said, UK ports. So itself from Portsmouth, a couple of ports, going to Liverpool up to Glasgow. And they're positioning it as expedition cruises. So they're not calling into big ports. They're calling into sort of nature reserves and small out-of-the-way places. What we also heard Arnold Donald say is they are in discussions in Italy, because of course AIDA is part of Carnival Corporation, and they have something like 90%, 98% German passengers normally. They also own Costa, which according to the interview I read with Arnold Donald, is something like 90-odd% of their passengers are Italian. They're discussing with the Italian government to start selling Costa in August. And what we also saw a statement from P&O Cruises in the UK, where again, 98% of their passengers are British. They're also in discussions about starting cruising up for British passengers as well. So as we're saying, we're seeing slowly starting up in those countries where the infection rates are getting at a level which is more manageable, negotiating for local cruises with local passengers. So definitely we're seeing some movement starting in Europe. So that's kind of one of the key updates there. And I think that's quite a big update and something that I think we'll be talking about quite a lot. But certainly I'm booked on that Hurtigruten cruise. At the moment, I think it's probably 50-50 will it go. And one of the things I'm really excited about if that does go is being able to report what actually physically happens on one of these cruises. And one of the things I will do in one of the updates this coming week is I'm going to look in detail at what is Carnival Corporation has agreed to, for example, for AIDA to start sailing, and what some of the other cruise lines have agreed to with their authorities in what measures are put in place for cruises to sail, because I think that could be a really good sense of these are cruises that are now sailing their big ships, 1,000 or more passengers are being on these ships, and what are the actual protocols. So that, watch out for that during the course of this week. So the other big news this week, before we start getting into questions and talking about memberships, is, as I said, the CDC is not yet negotiating with the cruise lines. However, the cruise lines are trying to become more assertive. So many of you might have seen, and I referred to in the video this week, that the Royal Caribbean Group, as they're now known, and the Norwegian Cruise Line Group, as they're now known, they have formed a healthy sailing panel. I'm actually going to show you. I've got a little screen grab here. They formed, there's 11 experts. So they are public health experts or kind of government experts. And they have formed this advisory panel. So it's the 2 different companies working together to develop protocols. And they're working on 4 different streams. They're working on the kind of the boarding, getting passengers on board to make sure the passengers come on board are kind of fit and well. The whole cleaning on board process. The third one, which I find also particularly interesting, is they're also working on the excursions and, the sense of how will excursions work. Will people have to go on cruise line only excursions or whatever? So there's that one. And the fourth one they're working on is if there is an outbreak, what happens? How's it dealt with on the ship, and how you get people back home? So that they did report at the end of August on that, and that's going to be very interesting because they're talking about those feeding into the documentation which goes into the CDC. Coming back to my point around why I'm not optimistic that cruising out of the US is going to start anytime soon, particularly out of Florida, where we're seeing every day kind of record numbers. So that's really some of the key updates. What I would like to do before we get into questions, finally, is just talk very briefly and give a couple of shout outs to some people who joined as members. One of the things that YouTube have set up and they've given certain creators access to is the opportunity for people to become a member of a channel. So it still means all the videos go out. So my 2 videos go out every week. The live stream every week will go out. But the people, if they want to go a little bit further, can become a member. And the idea is you then offer people various perks and benefits, etc. So if you want to find out more about that, and I've actually got a little video I'll play right at the very end of this, not to take up more time on live stream, but if you, now when you watch one of my videos, so for example, this is a video here, you'll see down the bottom in the corner there where it says subscribe, there's now a button which is called join. And if you click on that button, it gives you the opportunity to become a member. And there's a little fee you pay every month. You can choose a sort of level. And there's a whole bunch of perks. Now, at the moment, the perks are around more direct access, having your questions answered. I've got a couple of ebooks and books that you get, chance to decide what videos. So there's a few things around there. And I'm going to work with people to understand what perks they want a little bit more. But I'm officially launching that whole membership thing tonight. Again, don't feel that you have to join it. You're going to still get access to all of the videos. This is kind of just a little bit something extra if you want to support. But I do want to give a little shout out because I just put this out and didn't really talk about it. But already in the first day before it went live, 9 people actually signed up to become members, which is great. So I thought I'd give them a shout out, which is one of the things I said I would do as part of people becoming members. So Giacomo, John, Joe Dura, Laura Gurley, Becky, Shay Kafaros, probably massacre people's names. Hetty, who has been a great supporter. I see Hetty is back in I think she's been to every single one of the live streams. Thanks, Hetty, and becoming a member. Tara Queen, Robert G, Daniel Gaskell. So those are the ones that about 4:30 had become members. So if you want to find out more, you click the join button and find out more. And that will be a great thing to do. So why don't we move on now and really get stuck into questions. So we've seen lots and lots of questions coming in. So what I might do before I jump into also some of the channel questions is have a look at what people are doing, have a look at where people are from, and what people are talking about. One of the things that would also be interesting, by the way, as you post questions, one of the things that I would be interested to know, and it'd be good to get your comments in here to see where people in the live stream are feeling, what they're feeling is, if a cruise was launched near to you, so wherever you're based, if a cruise was launched near to you, which was a cruise only for residents of where you are, and they were, for example, perhaps cruises to nowhere, so shorter cruises, a bit like the German cruise lines are doing, is this something that you would absolutely book on, or are you still not really feeling now's the time to go cruising, you're going to wait till everything is back and running and ports, etc. running? So if a cruise to nowhere was launched by the cruise lines in your area, so you could just drive to, you don't have to fly to it, is this something that you would be absolutely, like I did this week, the minute it came out? I mean, it was announced in the morning, by the afternoon I booked it. Would that be something that you would do? So let's have a look. Gosh, we've got loads and loads of people from all around the world here. We've got Jack from Conroe, Texas, in the suburb of Houston. We've got people from all over. Laurie, good morning, LK59. One of the things I always find interesting is how people choose their YouTube names. It's normally a good story. So when you see their JM129, it'd be great to know. Brent, again, looks like from the US. So let's have a look. So bear in mind, as I said, I'd like to get your perspective on what your thought is. If that cruise was launched for you, would you do like me, book it, or would you just wait until everything's really settled down? So let's take a look at some of the questions, and then I will jump into some interesting ones that I've had from the channel as well. So I'll probably just go down these sort of more or less in order. What I try and do is I try and kind of group them when they look like they're ones to group. So let's have a look at, well, Heather and Ultimate Travel Adventures. That's great, nice long name there. So Ultimate Travel Adventures. If age groups are separated, what about spouses of different age groups? Could I not share a cabin with my husband? Now, for those of you who are not 100% sure what Heather's on about, is Heather's raising a really big, important point, one of the most controversial aspects of a document that came out by the EU. So the EU have created a document which is part of their series of their policies, and unfortunately I've forgotten the name of the whole thing. It's not called Healthy Sail. It will come to me in a second, but they've created a grouping where they are issuing travel advisory for the EU and travel guidelines. And they developed a guideline, a 49-page guideline, and I have a whole video about it, which was last week's video if you want to get into the detail of it, where I pulled out the 7 most contentious issues. But in that document, they spoke about the issue with passengers over the age of 65, and what they were suggesting is 2 things. First of all, they were saying that passengers over age 65 and above should seek medical advice and get some sort of medical screening of their own accord before they cruised. But secondly, they were suggesting that there should be separation potentially by age. So if you're age over 65 and over, on board, passengers over 65 would perhaps have a separate dining arrangement. Their certain facilities or functions would run at a separate time for passengers over 65, and possibly even excursions should be run separately. So I guess, perhaps the theatre show for passengers age 65 or over. Not surprisingly, this caused a lot of consternation and a lot of discussion. I showed a quote in the video, of this week's video about the US, where Frank Del Rio, who is the CEO of the Norwegian Cruise Line Group, so it's Norwegian and Oceania and Region 7C, where he basically said they're not really looking at that, but he was implying that it could be on the cards if it was the only way to get things unlocked. So if you want the exact quote, it is in that video from last week. So certainly it's something that's bubbling around. And the question that Heather raises is a very practical one. It doesn't actually mean that everyone aged over 65 has a partner as 65, or everyone they're traveling with is over 65. So how on earth would it work? And I think what we will see is there's been no ruling on it. None of the cruise lines have yet agreed that protocol, but significantly, I guess the cruises that are running out of Germany, which of course, as we know, Germany is really rooted and one of the big hearts and minds, I guess, of the EU, that over 65 suggestion and guideline has not been included in any of the protocols for AIDA, Mein Schiff, Hapag-Lloyd, or Hurtigruten. So my sense is that people just realize it's just not practical. Now, as we get into the nuances of it, maybe it'll come up. But certainly in those cruises, it's not been mentioned. And for the UK Hurtigruten, it has not been mentioned at all. So I'm thinking that hopefully will get parked, just simply because of that thing. What I suspect if they ever do it, which is what they spoke about, is they spoke about forming cohorts. So you might end up having, a bit like I guess we've seen on land, where certainly in many countries you'd have, certain households could mix together, and then you could have so many households. So they might end up forming traveler groups, but certainly that has not been answered. But the good news is, despite it being in the EU document, it's not been included at all. Good morning from Oregon. Let's have a look. So KB's also been, I think, pretty much all of the updates. And as KB, you answered a question about the membership things, which I did answer and sent you a link. I'll also post a link actually in here a bit later if you haven't seen that answer. So KB in the UK, hi Gary, I suppose the FCO advisory now invalidates holiday insurance. You said that's goodbye to our Symphony Caribbean cruise in October. I now hope the CDC extends its no sail ban. Absolutely. And I guess this is true of the State Department or whatever your equivalent is in each of the countries, if they don't recommend travel, it immediately invalidates your travel insurance. So that becomes increasingly risky to travel if anything crops up, because you're not going to be covered for anything, whether it's an accident, injury, a loss, delays, whatever it is. All the cruise lines, I think, so Royal Caribbean, which would be Symphony, they have, I think I'm right in saying, they of their own accord have cancelled cruises up to the 15th of October. I know on some of their other lines and other ships, it's actually a little bit further out than that. And I would say, based on what's happening with the CDC, I think it is fairly likely. I would also imagine, certainly KB, is if you, because I'm guessing you booked it with Royal Caribbean here, because certainly if you booked it online, you would have booked it with the Royal Caribbean office here, because I book cruises is here, or through your travel agent would be with the UK office here. I would say what also happens if the FCO does not allow you to travel somewhere, travel companies are actually obliged to refund you. So I think you will find you have two get outs. Is if you aren't able to go and you've booked your cruise in the UK with the UK office, they will have to refund you in some way, either refund you or future cruise credits. So that's something really important to bear in mind. And if you take a look, there's quite a lot of articles in the papers today, or people like Martin Lewis from, I want to say he's not Money Supermarket, he is Money Expert, whatever. A lot of those sites, they have discussed that point. So that's a really good point. So I don't think we'll be cruising till I'm watching. I don't forget the cruising. So Joyce is raising, this is a debate that is going around quite a lot. So Joyce raises the point around, when do we really think cruising will start up again? And what about the flu season? What do you think? I think it's very interesting to see. I think as we've seen, I think it's going to be very interesting clearly as we look heading into that winter season, and which is why I get a sense there is a reluctance of some of the health authorities to relax and release things because of their expectation of the combined flu and coronavirus thing. I think you're right. The point you're making is it's very clear that the health authorities are only relaxing lockdowns when the overall community level is quite low and when they can actually mitigate the protocol. So, for example, we're seeing lots of discussion around theatres on land not being able to open because of all the challenges, particularly in the UK. They're very old Victorian theatres without good ventilation. So I think it's going to be those two combinations. I think we will see cruising certainly in Europe. I think in the US, I think they will find a way to get it going because, but it's quite a long period of time since then. So my sense is it's going to get going. I'm much more pessimistic about in the US it going this year. So Paul, I've had a couple of cruises. In fact, one of the questions I had from the channel is around river cruising, because often when we talk cruising, a lot of the stuff, we talk ocean cruising and don't often forget to talk enough about river cruising. So let's have a look. Paul's raised the question, do you think river cruises are more likely to return than sea cruises based on smaller passenger numbers? So Paul, I'm not sure where you're based, but certainly what we're seeing is, and I'll talk about the US and I'll talk about Europe. We're absolutely seeing river cruising starting in Europe. Some have already sailed. And so definitely we're seeing those starting up. Significantly though, the ones that are starting up or have started up are cruise lines that rely on European passengers. So we saw Nico Cruises run some German language cruises. They ran those very early on the Rhine and the Danube. We've seen Arosa, which have sailed now on the Douro in Portugal, the Rhine and the Danube. And they're due to start from the middle of this month in France, because in France, the medical emergency expires on the 13th of July, so they weren't able to sail. Across Europe are starting sailing. So across Europe is the biggest in terms of number of ships. In Europe, they're also the oldest established European river cruising line owned by the Schmitter family based in Strasbourg in France. They've been going for 40 odd years. They are starting in France, that's their heartland. They would normally have 50, 60 or more percentage of their passengers are normally French. They're starting in France, but they're expanding into the other rivers and ramps up. And then they are starting in the Douro only in August. So certainly in Europe, we're seeing them starting up. However, if we take a look at Viking, for example, they extended now, I think, right through to the end of September into October, both their ocean and their river cruising. Avalon, Emerald, all those companies which tend to be mostly US passengers and a lot of Australians as well. So cruise lines like Scenic and Emerald actually owned by Australian companies, APT as well. So they are pushing back the starting date because they are very reliant on English-speaking passengers, first of all, and secondly, Americans and Australians. And of course, both Australians can't fly, and they're not able to leave and travel internationally, and Europe borders are closed to the US. So they are definitely pushing back. So definitely in Europe, if you want to go river cruising in Europe, you can. Now, this is also why for UK people, the Foreign Office advisory, because it was so blanket about cruising, was very frustrating for a lot of people because they could have now entered Europe and gone on a European river cruise. But because of the blanket ban, it means that travel insurance is invalid. So there's lots of pressure on the Foreign Office even to fine tune it to talk about ocean cruising, for example. Now, Paul, when it comes to the US, there was lots of plans to start river cruising in the US, but they have both been cancelled. So the American cruise line was due to start sort of in the more north. They cancelled it because there was an increase in just 48 hours before they're due to go. They cancelled their cruises 48 hours before they were due to go, because there needs to be people actually going on it. And then they were due to start sailing in the Mississippi, which they've also pulled because of the increase in cases. Now, they had also planned to start sailing with small ships heading up into places like Bar Harbor, etc., because they do also have smaller ships, but Bar Harbor did a vote and said they can't call there, even though they don't fall within the CDC rules. The point that Paul's making about smaller passenger numbers is, certainly in the US, the CDC rules are for ships of 250 passengers and over. So actually things like Uncruise, for example, is looking to start up in Alaska. They have those that are booked. You have to have a COVID-19 test to head into Alaska, and therefore to get onto the cruise, you have to have it. So definitely river cruising is more likely to start up. Certainly it's started in Europe and it's ramping up, particularly if you are a French speaker, German speaker, although they are starting to lay on more English speaking. But certainly if you're a European in Europe, you can. The US looks like they're trying to start, but again, they're going to have to have the cases down in those regions before the governors let themselves. The governors' rules that have stopped that. Different weeks, same sort of cruise lines. I want to pick up on the point that AC has raised. A different week, the same sort of from the cruise lines. We say we're about to stop cruising, but everything we're doing says otherwise. Cruising 2020 scrub January to June 2021, unlikely. I want to talk a little bit about that first point, which I think is a good point that AC raises. Is I think a lot of people who send me messages get very excited or confused because they're able to go online or talk to their travel agent and book a cruise, but then the cruise gets cancelled, and then there's a real sense of frustration because they say that the cruise lines are still selling me cruises that they know are not going to be able to sail. The reality is they have no idea when it's going to sail. But certainly I would be cautious personally about booking new 2020 cruises for a couple of reasons. One of which is we don't know when they're going to start. Certainly if in the US, we don't know when they're going to start up. And the cruise lines, by their own admission, if you look at every single interview, even on Friday or Thursday, when the Carnival did their update, they said, we have no idea when we're going to start cruising. But very, very importantly, is the cruises that are showing that you can currently book possibly or very likely won't sail. And the reason I say that is what they're all saying is, bear in mind, most of these ships, they've sent crew home, so they need to get crew back. They need to start up. What Arnold Donald said is it takes at least a month from getting the okay to sail to be able to start sailing, because they have to get crew back, they have the ships restocked, they have to gear up. So it's going to take a month anyway. But also, very importantly, they've also said is they're going to start in a cautious way. So like we've seen, all those German cruises I spoke about, all those Norway cruises I spoke about, all the French cruises and the UK cruises that I've spoken about, none of those existed. They were all created and put on sale because they were given the okay to sail. So I think we're going to see, if cruising does start in 2020 or even into 2021, when cruising starts, all the cruise lines have said they're going to ramp up slowly. They're going to slowly put ships out there. They're going to build up. They're going to look at new itineraries. They're going to design itineraries based on which ports are open. The itineraries might have to change. So a lot of those cruises that you're looking at are probably, or very likely, not going to happen because they just physically can't. And I think the challenge is going to head into 2021. So I would be cautious about booking a 2020 cruise unless it literally goes on sale because they've got the okay, like I did with the Richard Good, and even that's probably 50-50. But the cruise lines are still selling. Of course, a skeptic would say it's because they can still bring money in. Also, the caution I would have if you are booking a cruise is a lot of the cruise lines have launched what's called a cruise with confidence policy, which sounds fantastic, of course. It allows you cancelling with much shorter deadlines. You often have to pay, only instead of paying 90 days or 60 days, you sometimes have to pay a month ahead. Or in fact, Ponant is even a week before you go, you only have to pay the final balance, and you can still cancel 48 hours before. However, if you do cancel or they cancel, you can only get future cruise credit. So you lose the ability to get your cash back and you lose your ability to have the flexibility. So what I've tended to do is I've mostly taken, I took at the beginning a couple of future cruise credits, but I've mostly taken cash back. So although I've lost the premium, but it just gives you much more flexibility because I do think because I want to book cruises when it starts selling, and I want to have the flexibility. Whereas if I had all my future cruise credits, for example, locked up in other cruise lines, when Hurtigruten came on sale, I didn't have the cash to then start booking that cruise. So definitely that's something. So that's sort of hopefully the point that AC was raising. I want to touch on a question. I don't know the answer to this question. I'm just going to give you a perspective. So DJM129, if cruising doesn't start up till spring 2021, do you think one or more of the cruise lines will declare bankruptcy? Now, I guess the March 20, that 2021 point is very important. The big cruise lines, Royal Caribbean, Norwegian Cruise Line, Genting, all the big groupings have raised money that they can actually keep operating and reducing costs into 2021. So you're right, the challenge becomes raising cash into that. We've only seen at this point in time very small cruise lines go bust. So we've seen Royal Caribbean basically let Pullman Tour go, and we've seen some very, very small individual cruise lines. So it's going to be interesting to see. What we are seeing though is we're seeing cruise lines starting to get rid of ships. So Royal Caribbean effectively have got rid of 3 ships by letting Pullman Tour go. Carnival Cruise Line Group are getting rid of, I think it's now 11 or 13 ships. They either scrapping or selling them. So they're starting to kind of reduce capacity as a way of reducing costs. Certainly the big cruise lines are very well funded through into next year. So there's no real sense. What we may see, which I think we're seeing already, some signs of more consolidation. So for example, Silver Sea, which was partly owned by Royal Caribbean, this week they bought the rest of the shares. So Silver Sea is now 100% part of the Royal Caribbean group. It's not owned by the Manfrotto. No, it's not Manfrotto, it's the camera people, the Lefebvre family. So they're still involved in operating. So we've seen Royal Caribbean that. Very significantly, we've seen Norwegian and the Royal Caribbean group form this healthy sailing panel. And, it'll be interesting to see if that becomes more of a business relationship. Those are the things I think that I really take a look at. That's the thing I would take a look at. The longer it goes, I think the smaller companies are going to be the challenging ones. I'll just touch very briefly on Claire's point. Claire says, it seems the CDC are not really trying or interested in bringing back cruising to and from the US. What are your thoughts? So Claire, I mean, it's very clear that they are not at this point in time that focused on engaging with the cruise lines. I think it's very clear from the statements from the CDC as they have a real aversion to cruising, and it did create a lot of challenges for the CDC in the run-up. They are incredibly strict still about crew repatriation. So the CDC rules still do not allow cruise lines to disembark crew in the United States, take them, say, to the airport and fly them home on commercial craft. There are all sorts of rules still around not being able to repatriate crew in a traditional way. So that's why we're seeing cruise lines often sailing, like Scarlet Lady did just the other week, sailing back to Genoa to then disembark crew, which could then sail home. So the CDC has been really, really strict and tough. So and there doesn't seem a major incentive. I think, and I don't know this, but one of the obvious points that most people will point out is, first of all, there is a lot of bad rap, depending on your view, or around cruising and its role, or certainly it's become a poster child, I guess, for some of the outbreaks early on, with Diamond Princess and some of the things that happened there. There's lots of challenges of where the CDC had to manage ships that were being turned away around the world, finding ways of letting them come in to disembark passengers. So I think there's a lot of kind of sensitivity around that and a lot of cautiousness, because if they sign off on cruising and there's problems, it creates problems for them. So I think they are taking a very cautious approach, and they do have a fair degree of hostility. Also bear in mind that the cruise lines are not incorporated in the United States, and the ships are not flagged in the United States, with one exception, Pride of America, which is the Norwegian cruise line, which is based in Hawaii. So again, it's, unlike the airlines or unlike other businesses, they also perhaps there's got much less political pressure on them as well. So I think it's going to be a real challenge. And as long as the numbers are big, I guess it's not the infection numbers are big. They appear to be at the moment. It's hard for them to gauge. So I think we're going to see a lot of rocky road ahead from that perspective. I don't think there's a massive incentive, because there's quite a lot of downsides for them signing off cruising, I guess. I'll answer Dee's question. I've sort of answered. So Dee is asking the question, when do you plan to cruise again? Well, at this point in time, is if all goes to plan, my next cruise will be on the 2nd of September with Hurtigruten out of Portsmouth. That's a 5-night cruise, calling it UK ports. It's traveling, the cruise ship itself is at, I'm trying to remember the exact number, it holds 580, so it's a small ship, it's an expedition ship. It's one of their newest ships built in 2019. It can hold 580, I think, or 560 passengers. They're only sailing with 350 passengers to enable more social distancing. They're calling, as I mentioned earlier, they're only calling largely at not traditional ports. They're calling at some nature reserves and less busy ports where it can be managed much more. So lots of stuff on ROV boats and things. From what I can ascertain, it's going to only be UK passengers. So they only seem to be marketing it to UK passengers at the moment. So it's again within that ecosystem, if you like. So that is my first cruise. All my other cruises I had in September have all been cancelled. Enchanted Princess, Spirit of Adventure, because they've been cancelled already. My next cruise that hasn't been cancelled yet is November, which is to Antarctica, a 3-week Antarctica trip on Ponant. And at this point in time, I don't know if it's going to happen. And I've been trying to ascertain whether the Antarctica season, a bit like the Alaska season, will be scrapped. But certainly at the moment, that's the plan. And I just don't know what's going to happen with that. I actually have cruises in January out of the Caribbean that I don't know whether it's going to happen either. That's the one even by January, I'm still not sure. So that's in the plan. So hopefully in September, if the numbers stay down in the UK, which they are, touch wood, and they get the final sign-off from Public Health England, which of course they still haven't finally got, it'll be great to actually experience that cruising experience and talk about all the protocols. There's lots of other protocols which are talk closer to the time that they're doing. Julie's making the point again, next on cancel cruise is the end of October. So certainly if you're in the US, at the moment in the US, most of the cruise lines have cancelled through to middle of September, a couple to end of September. And they are waiting, of course, for the no sail order. If you're in the UK, most of the cruise lines, certainly part of the Carnival group, like the Cunards, the P&Os, they mostly cancel through the end of September into October, middle of October, end of October. Some of the Cunard ships, end of October. And then some of the smaller lines have pushed back. I think I mentioned Viking have just announced that they're pushing that back. But certainly, I think over the next couple of weeks, this is when we're going to see the September-October period, where we're going to get much more sense. I think in Europe, the big thing will be is the Carnival Corporation, particularly because that's Cunard, P&O, and lots of, then we've got Fred Olsen, Saga. Are they going to get the okay from Public Health England to sell? So it's going to be extremely, extremely interesting. Don is raising the point when we talk about cancellations, is he's still booked on the Lure of the Seas, September 20th from Barcelona. Can't see this going ahead, but we'll wait for Royal Caribbean to cancel. 2 points I want to make on that, Don, is, which I think Don's probably alluding to anyway, is at this point in time, 20th of September out of Spain does look very unlikely because Spain still has an indefinite ban on cruise ships entering their waters. And they have no date that they've announced in that announcement. Makes sense. Yeah, they have no plan to review that at all. So we don't know when they're even going to review it. So it could be next month. So we have no idea. So they have a complete ban on that. And certainly, what's interesting is we haven't heard any of the Spanish sort of based cruise lines talking about a similar thing as we've seen in France, in Germany, in Norway, etc. So that's the first thing. Is I think it's very unlikely because Spain don't seem to be making any moves. So we'll see. The second point I want to pick up on, which I think is a very good point that Don's making, is about waiting to cancel. One of the things that I really recommend you try and do if you possibly can is don't cancel. Wait for the cruise line to cancel. And that's really important because if the cruise line cancels, you're going to get an option. You're going to get an option to either take cash. Now, you can wait a while for it, up to 90 days in many cases, or they'll give you that future cruise bonus, which still seems to be running at 125%. I mean, I was very lucky with Virgin Voyages. They did a 200% when they cancelled. So I've actually got 2 cruises out of that. I've got a Mediterranean with their new ship and I've got a Caribbean from that one original thing, which is why I took it. But most of them do 125. But if you wait, you do get that option of cash and some kind of bonus. So I would definitely wait if you possibly can. The good news for those people who still have cruises out there, not cancelled, as I mentioned, is the date where you have to pay the final balance. Most of them are reducing that amount, so you don't have to hand over. So, for example, I mentioned earlier in the question that who asked me that in November is Ponant, for all their cruises at the end of October, have reduced to 7 days. So you have to pay your final balance 7 days before the cruise. What they're currently saying for the rest of the year is 1 month before. But I'm actually asking, are they going to change that policy into even shorter than 1 month? So it's really important that really to wait. I want to pick up if you're on the EST business Caribbean. So I want to talk just pick up on the UK since we were talking about those ports. Philip Romanas. Any news for UK cruises, Christmas cruises from Southampton? There is no news other than when the Foreign Office issued their do not sail ruling, advisory, I guess not ruling, advisory. What Clear, the cruise line of the UK and Ireland, issued, and then also P&O and Cunard, the same day that came out, within hours of coming out, issued a statement saying that they are in active negotiations with Public Health England and with the Department of Transportation to start cruising. And they certainly didn't indicate they're both. I think it's middle of October for P&O, if I remember correctly, end of October for Cunard. And certainly they seem to be both Clear and P&O seem to feel that give noise that negotiation is going quite well. So I think certainly it is looking promising. The question, though, I would watch out for, Philip, is what form that Christmas cruise will take. Because, for example, the Spanish ports, if Spain is not opening, a lot of those Christmas cruises go to the Canary Islands. But if Canary Islands isn't open to cruise ships because it falls within the Spanish remit, the nature of the Christmas cruise may change. So there may be a Christmas cruise, but it may be a cruise to nowhere, it may be around the UK, whatever. But certainly, I think we will see over the coming month or two much more news on that. But they are certainly much more optimistic mood music than we're seeing from some of the other regions. There are lots of discussion. I've seen lots of points here which people are talking about, which I'll just pop up just to give you a sense of what people are seeing if you haven't seen that. So LK59 is, why is it safe to fly in an airplane for hours but not safe to cruise? It's very contradictory. And I've seen some other questions around things you can do and can't do. And I guess this is a question that came up a lot, for example, when the Foreign Office issued their point about the nature of airplanes and cruise lines and the fact that you could fly somewhere, stay in a resort, fly back. And I guess it's just the fact, and it's always going to be the fact, that cruising is seen as a different, follows different rules, different standards, the sense of how the air systems work. It's a contained environment. What happened before? Because as we all know, norovirus is not something that just happens on ships. It happens in hospitals. In fact, more cases of norovirus happen on land than they happen on ship. But because ships are the nature of the way they have to report it, when a norovirus breaks out on a ship, it's certainly, people all know it happened in that place. It happened in that ship, and it gets reported because they have to report it. If it breaks out in a link to a restaurant or a flight or something, it's kind of dissipated and it's not as visible. So I think there's also that sense of there's always going to be a certain set of rules. The other reason, which I do think, coming back to your point, LK59, is when people fly somewhere, they land and they head off. Of course, with contact tracing, if there's a problem on a flight, they can probably contact those people and sort them out. However, on a cruise, if you're on a cruise for a week, 2 weeks, as we saw happen, and you have an outbreak, you suddenly have a ship full of potentially hundreds of people who are infected. And then you have this whole problem of people not wanting to let them on land, which is what happened in the lockdown. People weren't letting ships dock. And that becomes the challenge, which is why we're seeing a lot of focus around the getting home. So even what Clear have said, they're looking at a whole process, working with the health authorities and the CDC, so the youth initiative, looking at from the time people leave home, going on the cruise, getting back home and all the things that could go wrong. Whereas on an airplane, people board, they fly off, and then you contact trace them, and you don't have to worry about how to deal with them. I think that is definitely one of the really big challenges. So lots of one of the points that someone made a point to this. I don't know how serious this point is, but I thought I'd raise the point because I've seen it as well. It's kind of like a PR thing as well. One of the points that someone raised here, and maybe it was Brent as well, that said about, could US people not fly into the Caribbean and pick up Caribbeans that only go around the Caribbean? Of course, the Caribbean has to be open from that perspective, but certainly there are cruises which only go around the Caribbean. So, for example, a lot of the cruise lines from Europe in the season, so the Mediterranean season, which runs in the European summer, at the end of the summer, they send a lot of their ships to the Caribbean. And they can be based in places like sailing out of Barbados, in places that have a lot of traffic in and out. And they literally will go point to point, Caribbean island, start in, say, Barbados, sail a couple of Caribbean islands, end in Barbados, do a changeover, do it again. Things like Sea Dream, those kind of things that base their ships in the Caribbean. So certainly there is potential if the Caribbean opens and ships get moved to the Caribbean. This could end up being an option where you can fly into the Caribbean from the US once that opens, if cruise lines are based in the Caribbean. That could be one of the things to watch out for. Is that likely to happen? Certainly the European ships head off there, and they normally have Caribbean seasons. The point that Brent's making, if anyone's interested, is the Barbados Prime Minister, and I'm sure there was another island I read about in the paper today. They are basically saying, because of people are able to work from home increasingly, they're offering the chance for people to go and work for a year from home in the Caribbean island. It's interesting to see how serious that is, because certainly it's a very good PR exercise, the idea of being based in a beautiful Caribbean island instead of in cold London or wherever it is. A very specific question which I can answer very easily. Sean B, when does the CDC no sale order end? So the CDC order, as it stands at the moment, is due to expire on the 24th of July. So anytime between now and then, they will extend it without a shadow of a doubt, because no protocols have been agreed. It's they're not even starting the discussion. So it will get extended. I mean, if I was a betting man, which I am when I was shipping in the casino, I don't think anyone will take a bet against the order being allowed to expire. But 24th of July. So it's going to be really interesting, because we're now at the 12th. Is the 12th? So within the next week to 10 days, we will see that the update on that. So that's going to be really, 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 really interesting. That's when Sean's already picked on that point. So let's have a look. So Brent's making some good points and people liking the points. So thanks for that, Brett. So let's have a look at the issue on prices. What effect, if any, do you think this will have on cruise prices? I'll tell you what I think. I'll tell you what the cruise lines are saying, and I'll tell you what I think one of the things that might happen. What the cruise lines are saying is their goal is to keep prices up. So what happened in the financial crisis is prices fell quite significantly. So those of you who were cruising at that time will have seen prices came down a lot, and it was about filling up ships. And it didn't work that well for cruise on a number of levels. Number one, because they earned less than they would normally earn because they were discounting. And secondly, they felt it also messed up the product, because you started getting people on a cruise line that wasn't necessarily right for them, or wasn't right for the cruise line, wasn't the type of people they wanted, because they wanted the party people, or they wanted old people, whatever it was, people like dressing up or whatever they were trying to do, and it didn't actually work that well. So what they're talking about now, once they can eventually start sailing, is they're going to try and restrict capacity. As I've already mentioned, they are talking about phasing back into service and bringing enough capacity online to meet demand. So they're not going to go out all ships sailing, all go, and try to madly fill up ships. They're going to control capacity to try and keep prices up, because obviously for them, margin is going to be really, really important. And I think it's going to be interesting, because margin is going to probably be even more important than filling ships, because bringing a ship back on to service is going to cost a lot of money as well, a lot of cost and all that stuff. So they definitely have said they're going to try and keep that the prices up as much as they can. Personally, I think we're going to see an enormous amount of volatility in prices, and I do think we will see prices going down. And it'll go down in one key way, is you'll see much more bundled. So if you are looking at booking a cruise for 2021, and I've been looking at various 21 cruises, it's pretty much every single cruise that I've booked, it has stuff bundled in. So I'm finding it pretty much very easy to buy all-inclusive type packages now, where they'll throw in drinks, gratuities, some specialty dining, some excursions, Wi-Fi. So the price has effectively been reduced. So although you're still paying 100, whatever it is, much more stuff is being bundled in. So the prices are effectively going down. But the other key thing that hasn't yet been factored in is a lot of people who book, a lot of people book a year, 2 years ahead. A lot of those people are not going to want to cruise. I think absolutely we're going to see die-hard cruises, perhaps a lot of people in here on the live stream watching the channel. These are people like me, like you, who really want to cruise. But there are a lot of people who are going to be put off cruising without a shadow of a doubt. And those people have a cruise booking which they will want to not do. So I think we're going to see more and more people pulling out, more and more capacity coming on, and then cruise lines trying to fill capacity. So I think we're going to see prices under a lot of pressure. What I would say is one of the things that I do is whenever I book a cruise, and I've mentioned this before, so those who've heard me talk about it, apologize for that. But when I book a cruise, I then track the price. And there's a couple of sites like Cruise Watch, you can do it on Cruise Critic. You put in your cruise and you track the price. And it will tell you if prices are coming down. Every cruise that I have for 2021, I am constantly getting alerts that the price is coming down. In fact, multiple times. Key thing if you do that, so if you do book, because you want to book now and you're worried about prices going down, put those alerts in. As prices go down, get hold of your agent, get hold of the cruise line, say, look, prices come down. I can see I paid 100. I can see you're now selling it for 90. What are you going to do? Or even better, say, I want an upgrade. I want a lower price. And certainly in my experience, every single time I've done that, I've got either an upgrade or fares being reduced or whatever. Cruise lines won't necessarily do automatically. Virgin have just done it. So if you are cruising with Virgin Voyages, they just cut their prices recently by 30%. I had a cruise book, the one I mentioned in the Caribbean, they cut my fare by 30%. So they're doing it proactively. Royal Caribbean have made it clear they will match pricing, but you have to contact them. So I do think that prices actually will come down as we head into next year when they know exactly what cruises are in place and they are putting ships on and they want to fill them. But if you do want to book because you're worried about that, just track prices. I would say that's absolutely the key thing. I think the point about a couple of people I see commenting is, as you mentioned, as people, so Sunja Sama is talking about here and making a couple of comments around as they start repatriating, coming out of cold layup, about bringing it back, getting it on stream. It's going to take time. There's going to be a lot of cost involved. They have to get crew back. They have to train them. There's going to be new protocols. So again, getting a ship back on stream, so they're going to start bringing ships on. Once they're committed, they need to fill that ship. And because a lot of the itineraries are going to be different, they're going to put it on sale, like we saw with the Hurtigrutens, all those cruises I was talking about, starting in the UK, Germany, etc. And then they're going to be wanting to fill ships. That's why I think also we're going to see a pressure down on prices. Bill's just saying he's enjoyed it, which is fantastic. Thanks for joining. You have to leave. We'll watch the whole thing tomorrow. Bear in mind, if you've joined this later or you don't have a chance to join these live streams, they do go live after this on the channel, and I keep them up for at least a week sort of live. But I then do have a playlist if you want to go back even further and watch other ones. So definitely, you can watch these. You can jump through and fast forward and review, as you want to. So definitely, great, Bill. Thanks for joining, and definitely you can go back and watch as they are on the channel. So what I'd like to do now is we're coming up almost for an hour. We've been on for an hour. I really appreciate very, very much all of you who've joined the live stream. Thanks for all of your questions. As I've said, I will definitely go through and make sure I've answered those, try and build them into next time, get back to you. Nigel's point, that's one great thing to think about is, if you look at the EU report that I mentioned with the guidelines, very encouraging. I agree with Nigel. It says version 1. This is the beginning of a dialogue. What I love about the document, even though it's got some quite extreme things that cruisers won't like in there, like certain things about masks and the over 65s, separating all that stuff. but it is a document, it is a recommendation. So cruise lines can now start negotiating. The challenge we have in the CDC is there is no discussion, there's no basis to start that dialogue. So really, I agree with you. It's very, very exciting. And as John's mentioned, and I touched on, is we've got to bear in mind, as the CDC agrees things, as Public Health England agrees, there's still the whole discussion with ports, which is why I think we're seeing more and more of those cruises to nowhere, which of course can't happen in the US because of the way the US law works. Or we're seeing cruises going out of one country, only calling it one country's ports. Thanks so much for joining the live stream. I really appreciate it. Thanks for all of the comments. Great to see different people interacting. I've just seen somebody looks like they've signed up Sunspot because my little alerts come up telling me that you've just joined the channel. Fantastic. Thanks very, very much for doing that. I have coming up at 6:15 this week's video, which is going to be all about Princess Cruises. So you can watch that shortly. And what I will do as I'll wrap up the live stream, what I'll actually do is I will show you, I'll just let it run at the end of the video, the little video that does talk a little bit more about channel memberships. But thanks so much for joining. Stay safe, keep well, and hopefully I look forward to watching my videos. And of course, joining me again on next Sunday's live stream. So I'll leave you with the channel membership video to watch. Thanks for clicking to find out more about joining and becoming a member of the Tips for Travelers channel. Channel memberships are a feature that YouTube have, which allow viewers like you, support creators like me, to keep the channel going. As a member of the channel, you pay a small monthly fee and get access to a whole bunch of perks. And the perks are detailed down below and keep changing and evolving and added to as I learn more about what members want. Some of them include things like the ability to direct and decide what very specific videos I make, members only live streams, members only community posts, and the ability to download a whole bunch of cruise related ebooks that I've written. As I mentioned, the perks keep getting added to and updated as I learn more and more about what you as members will want. If you want to become a member, review the various levels below and sign up. No matter what you decide, of course, really the most important thing to do to support the channel is keep watching the videos that I release every week and join the weekly live streams. But I hope that you will consider becoming a member and join the Tips for Travelers channel.